It's week 8 of the NFL season, and here are my predictions for this week. But first, how did I do in week 7? In week 7, I went 9-6 in my predictions. Kicking off the week on Thursday Night Football, we have the 5-1 Vikings versus the 2-4 Rams. The Vikings are coming off their first loss of the season, 31-29 against the Lions. Sam Darnold went 22 of 27, 259 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Aaron Jones had 93 yards and a touchdown, and Justin Jefferson had 7 receptions for 81 yards and a touchdown. And their defense combined for 4 sacks. Then for the Rams, they beat the Raiders 20-15. Matthew Stafford didn't have a great game, going 14 of 23, 154 yards, and an interception. Then Kyren Williams had 76 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. And on defense, they had 2 sacks and 3 interceptions. This week, the Rams are getting Cooper Kupp back. The Vikings have given up the second least amount of rushing yards this season. And the Rams have been mostly a running team since their top 2 receivers have been out all season long. But with Cooper Kupp coming back, the Rams should be able to throw the ball a little more. But I still have the Vikings winning. Then moving over to Sunday, the 5-2 Ravens versus the 1-6 Browns. The Ravens beat the Buccaneers 41-31 on Monday Night Football. And Lamar Jackson had a great game, going 17 of 22, 281 yards and 5 touchdowns, while also having 50 yards rushing. Then Derrick Henry had 15 carries for 169 yards, while also having a 13-yard receiving touchdown. And now on the season, he leads the NFL in carries with 134, yards 873, and touchdowns with a total of 10. He's currently on pace for 2,100 rushing yards and a combined 24 touchdowns. Then also, Rashad Bateman had 4 receptions for 121 yards and a touchdown. Then on defense, Marlon Humphrey had 2 interceptions. Then for the Browns, they lost 21-14 against the Bengals. And in this game, Deshaun Watson started out pretty good, going 15 of 17 for 128 yards, but he ended up tearing his Achilles and is out for the season. And their backup quarterback, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, has a finger injury after throwing an interception trying to make the tackle. So Jameis Winston's probably going to be the starter, and they signed Bailey Zappi. But also in this game, Nick Chubb came back and had 11 carries for only 22 yards, but he had a touchdown. And Cedric Tillman had 8 receptions for 81 yards. But this Browns offense is just terrible, and I have the Ravens winning. Then the 2-5 Jets versus the 1-6 Patriots. The Jets lost on Sunday Night Football 37-15 against the Steelers. Aaron Rodgers had 276 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Then Breece Hall had 38 yards and a touchdown rushing, and 6 receptions for 103 yards. Then Devontae Adams in his first game with the Jets had 9 targets, with only 3 receptions and 30 yards. But this Jets team, even with all that talent, they've just not been good. Then looking at the Patriots, they lost 32-16 in London against the Jaguars. Drake May had a very good game, going 26 of 37, 276 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Hunter Henry had 8 receptions for 92 yards. And their offensive line held up pretty well in this game, giving up just 2 sacks and 3 QB hits. With how good Drake May has been playing, and if their offensive line can hold up, I have the Patriots winning. Then the 4-2 Eagles versus the 3-4 Bengals. Philly's coming off a dominant win 28-3 against the Giants. Jalen Hurts went 10 for 14, 114 yards and a touchdown. But the Eagles ran all over the Giants last week, having a combined 269 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. Saquon Barkley had 176 yards and a touchdown, and Jalen Hurts had 22 yards rushing and 2 rushing touchdowns. Then A.J. Brown had 5 receptions for 89 yards and a touchdown. And on defense, they had 8 sacks. Then for the Bengals, in their win versus the Browns, Joe Burrow had 181 yards and 2 touchdowns, and now on the season has 1,700 yards, 14 touchdowns, and only 2 interceptions. The Bengals have now won 3 out of 4 games, and they're at home this week. This should be a very good game. And I have the Bengals winning. Then the 5-2 Packers versus the 2-5 Jaguars. Last week, the Packers won 24-22 against the Texans, and they won on a walk-off field goal with zeros on the clock. Jordan Love in this game had 220 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Josh Jacobs had 76 yards rushing, and Romeo Doubs had 8 receptions for 94 yards. Then for the Jaguars, in their win versus the Patriots, Trevor Lawrence went 15 of 20, 193 yards and a touchdown, and Tank Bigsby had a huge game with 118 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Brian Thomas Jr. had 5 receptions for 89 yards and a touchdown. The Jaguars looked a lot better last week, and they could have some momentum coming into this game, but it really comes down to if they can get their run game going against the Packers, and the Packers are around middle of the pack with rushing yards given up this year. But with the way Jordan Love has been playing, I have the Packers winning. Then the 1-5 Titans versus the 5-1 Lions. The Titans lost 34-10 versus the Bills. The Titans came out early in this game and played very well, going up 10-0 in the second quarter. But James Cook would also score a touchdown in the second quarter, and at halftime, the Titans were up 10-7. But in the second half, it was all Bills, but the Bills would end up outscoring the Titans 34-0 after they were up 10-0. Mason Rudolph had 215 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Tony Pollard had 61 yards rushing. Then for the Lions, with their win over the Vikings, they are now first place in their division. Jared Goff had a great game, going 22 of 25, 280 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs had 116 yards and 2 touchdowns, while also having 4 receptions for 44 yards. And Amon-Ra St. Brown had 8 receptions, 112 yards and a touchdown. But Jameson Williams will be suspended for the next 2 games for performance enhancers, and he's been their second leading receiver this season. But I have the Lions winning. Then the 4-3 Falcons versus the 4-3 Buccaneers. This is a huge divisional game, and whoever will win this will be in first place. The Falcons already took the first game of the season series, and that was a great shootout on Thursday Night Football in Week 5. But last week, the Falcons lost 34-14 against the Seahawks. Kirk Cousins had 232 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Bijan Robinson had 103 yards and a touchdown, and Kyle Pitts had 7 receptions for 65 yards. Then for the Buccaneers, in their loss versus the Ravens on Monday night, Baker Mayfield went 31 of 45, 370 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, and now in the season has 18 touchdowns. But in that game, they lost Chris Godwin for the season with a dislocated ankle, and Mike Evans left this game early with a hamstring injury and is questionable for this week. So the Buccaneers are definitely going to be in the trade market for a wide receiver, and they could possibly go after Mike Williams from the Jets. So I have the Falcons winning. Then the 3-4 Cardinals versus the 2-4 Dolphins. The Cardinals are coming off a nice win, 17-15 against the Chargers, and they won this game with a 32-yard walk-off field goal with zeros on the clock. Kyler Murray had 145 yards, a touchdown, and an interception, and he also had 64 yards and a touchdown rushing, and his touchdown was 44 yards, and James Conner had 101 yards rushing and 51 yards receiving. Then for the Dolphins, they lost 16-10 against the Colts, and in this game, Tyler Huntley got injured. Tim Boyle came in and played for most of the game. They had a combined 188 yards rushing, and Jonnu Smith led them in receiving with 7 receptions for 96 yards and a touchdown. But Tua might be able to come back this week. He is set to return to practice, and if that goes well, he's going to start again. So if Tua plays, I have the Dolphins winning. Next, the 4-3 Colts versus the 5-2 Texans. Last week for the Colts, Anthony Richardson went 10 of 24, 129 yards, while also having 56 yards rushing, and Michael Pittman had 3 receptions for 63 yards. Then for the Texans, in their loss versus the Packers, CJ Stroud couldn't get anything going 10 of 21 for 86 yards, and Joe Mixon had 115 yards and 2 touchdowns rushing. But they had no offense in this game, only having 197 yards as a team. But their offense should bounce back this week. And the Colts offense hasn't been great with Anthony Richardson at quarterback, but they're still going to start him over Flacco because they want to develop him more. But also Jonathan Taylor is questionable this week and could come back, but I still have the Texans winning. Then the 2-5 Saints versus the 3-3 Chargers. The Saints got blown out 33-10 versus the Broncos on Thursday Night Football. Spencer Rattler went 25 of 35, 172 yards, and he got a hip injury in this game. game, but he's going to start versus the Chargers. Chris Olave is questionable for this game after missing last week with a concussion, and the Saints have now lost 5 games in a row. Then for the Chargers, in their loss versus the Cardinals, Justin Herbert had 349 yards, and Will Disley had 8 receptions for 81 yards, and they have now lost 3 out of their last 4 games. With how injured the Saints are, and they lead the NFL in the most yards given up, I have the Chargers winning. Then the 5-2 Bills versus the 4-3 Seahawks. In the Bills win over the Titans, Josh Allen had 323 yards and 2 touchdowns. And now in the season, he has 1,400 yards, 12 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. And he also has 3 rushing touchdowns. Then Amari Cooper in his first game with the Bills had 4 receptions for 66 yards and a touchdown. And Keon Coleman had his first 100-yard game in the NFL with 125 yards. Then for the Seahawks, they had a great bounce-back win after losing 3 games in a row. And in that game, Geno Smith went 18 of 28, 207 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Then Kenneth Walker had 69 yards rushing and a touchdown, and DK Metcalf had 4 receptions for 99 yards and a touchdown. But he did get a knee injury in this game. It's an MCL sprain, and it's questionable for this week. And I have the Bills winning. Then we have the 4-2 Bears versus the 5-2 Commanders. The Bears are coming off their bye week, and in week 6, they beat the Jaguars 35-16 in London. And for the Commanders, they're coming off a 40-7 win over the Panthers. Then in this game, Jaden Daniels got a rib injury and left early in the first quarter, and is questionable for this week. But Marcus Mariota had a very good game, going 18 of 23, 205 yards and 2 touchdowns. Then Brian Robinson Jr. had 71 yards and a touchdown, and Terry McLaurin had 6 receptions for 98 yards. I really hope Jaden Daniels plays in this game, because it would be the matchup of the number 1 overall pick versus the number 2 overall pick. And both these teams have been great this season. But with Jaden Daniels injured, even if he plays, the Bears are fresh off a bye week, so I have the Bears winning. Then the 1-6 Panthers versus the 4-3 Broncos. In the Panthers' loss to the Commanders, Andy Dalton had 93 yards and 2 interceptions. Then Chuba Hubbard had 52 yards and a touchdown. And Jatavion Sanders had 6 receptions for 61 yards. Then for the Broncos, in their win versus the Saints, Bo Nix had 164 yards passing and 75 yards rushing. And Javonte Williams had a big game with 88 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns and 3 receptions for 23 yards. And their defense played great with 6 sacks and holding the Saints to just 5 third-down conversions in 17 attempts. This Broncos defense has been great. Bo Nix has been playing good enough, and I have the Broncos winning. Then we have the 6-0 Chiefs versus the 2-5 Raiders. The Chiefs beat the 49ers 28-18. And Patrick Mahomes again didn't have a good game, but they still won. He went 16 of 28, 154 yards and 2 interceptions, and now has 8 interceptions on the season, and has still thrown at least 1 interception in every game this season. But Kareem Hunt had 78 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. And for the Raiders, in their loss versus the Rams, they scored no touchdowns and had 5 field goals. Aiden O'Connell did get injured in this game with a fractured thumb and will be placed on IR. But Gardner Minshew had 150 yards and 3 interceptions. Alexander Mattison had 92 yards rushing. And the rookie tight end Brock Bowers continues to have a great season with 10 receptions for 93 yards. And I have the Chiefs winning. Then on Sunday Night Football, the 3-3 Cowboys versus the 3-4 49ers. The Cowboys are coming off their bye week, and in their last game in week 6, they got blown out 47-9 against the Lions. Then for the 49ers, in their loss over the Chiefs, Brock Purdy had 212 yards and 3 interceptions. Jordan Mason had 58 yards rushing, and is still second in the NFL in rushing yards with 667. And George Kittle had 6 receptions for 92 yards. But in this game, Brandon Ayuk tore both his ACL and MCL and is out for the season. And Deebo Samuel got injured during this game as well, and he's most likely going to miss this week also. So I have the Cowboys winning. Then on Monday Night Football, the 2-5 Giants versus the 5-2 Steelers. In the Giants' loss against the Eagles, Daniel Jones went 14 of 21 with 99 yards and was benched for Drew Lock, and he went only 3 of 8. And as a team, they had a total of 119 yards. Then for the Steelers, in their win against the Jets, Russell Wilson went 16 of 29, 264 yards and 2 touchdowns. Najee Harris had 102 yards and a touchdown, and George Pickens had 5 receptions for 111 yards and a touchdown. With Russell Wilson playing quarterback, that really opens up the pass game for them, and I have the Steelers winning. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Goodbye.